Hi, I'm Lori Fangio, and I'm back today in my kitchen to talk to you about food preparation. How you prepare your food can affect how the key nutrients affect your health. So we're going to cover lots of food preparation techniques that will help you optimize the nutrients in your food. First, we're going to start with animal proteins. Whether you're starting with a piece of meat that's extra lean or has some fat, preparation techniques are important. Before cooking beef, pork, or lamb, cut off any visible solid fat. Before cooking poultry, remove the skin and as much of the visible fat as possible. When it's time to roast your poultry, you can arrange it on a tray with a drip pan to let the excess fat drain off. Before cooking whole fish, it's sometimes recommended to remove the skin from wild fish, depending on where it was caught, to limit the toxins. If you're interested in increasing your fish intake but don't like the characteristic oceany taste, try soaking the raw fish in milk for at least an hour, then rinse before cooking. When preparing shellfish like shrimp, it's okay to leave the tails and shells on when cooking. It may supply added nutrients. When dealing with animal proteins, safety is paramount, so always be sure and put your products in the refrigerator. If you're not going to use them within a couple of days, put them in the freezer. And what I like to suggest is when you bring your protein home, go ahead and section it out into individual portions, and then when you're ready to make a meal, you can pull out a single serving. This will prevent waste as well as overeating and will also preserve freshness. Let's talk about plant proteins. That's our legumes, the beans, peas, and lentils. These are nutritional powerhouses because they have a good amount of protein, and it's great to supplement these plant-based proteins for animal proteins 2 or 3 times a week. One disadvantage to these products is they can be difficult to digest, but some things help with that, like proper cooking and sprouting. In a few minutes, we'll discuss the most common techniques. Canned beans and legumes do provide a nice convenience, but it's always recommended that you cook from scratch to maximize the nutritive value. Beans and legumes can take a little while to cook, but if they're prepared properly, you can shorten the cooking time. Always rinse dried legumes before cooking to clear away dirt, debris, or dead beans. Just place them in a colander and run water over them until they're clean. Soaking rinsed legumes overnight softens them and significantly reduces cooking time, as dramatic a reduction as from 2 hours to 20 minutes. It's also important to rinse canned beans to remove as many preservatives and added sodium as possible. Using nuts and seeds in your kitchen is pretty straightforward. Just remove the shells. And you can sprout nuts just like legumes, just soak them overnight, and it offers you a whole new product to be used in a healthy kitchen. After soaking nuts, you can use them for making nut cheeses, which make great bases for dips and cake fillings. You can use just about any nut here, but for macadamia nuts, you don't need to soak them. And when working with almonds, just be sure and pop off the brown skin. Place the nuts in a food processor and grind until smooth, gradually adding some of the soaking water as needed to attain the desired texture. Popular methods of giving it a cheesy-like flavor include adding fresh lemon juice and garlic, lactic acid drops, and even letting the finished product sit at an ambient temperature for a day. You can also make a similar product with cooked legumes. We're most familiar with hummus, made from ground chickpeas, or nacho toppings made from ground pinto beans. To make nut or seed butter, grind the nuts or seeds, toasted or not, for about 10 to 12 minutes until you get the desired consistency. Keep the finished product refrigerated. This makes delicious, nutritious spreads without adding sugar, salt, preservatives, or hydrogenated fats. Now let's talk about how we sprout nuts, seeds, and legumes. First, rinse the seeds, nuts, or legumes to remove the dead-looking, off-colored, or shriveled seeds, as well as any dirt or foreign particles. Then soak the seeds. Place them in a bowl, cover them with cool water, and a couple of inches of water over the top level of the seeds. This will account for the swelling. Soak them for 12 to 24 hours, but not in the refrigerator. Drain and rinse the beans in either a fine mesh colander or a cheesecloth. Next, put them in a sprouting jar and let them sit at an ambient temperature for several days. If you don't have your own sprouting jar, you can make your own with a canning jar and some cheesecloth. To make the mesh top, cut your cheesecloth in a square and screw it on with the jar lid. Now that we have our jars all set up, we're ready to start the sprouting of the beans. And so all we're going to do is just rinse these beans about 3 times a day right through the cheesecloth. In a couple of days, you're going to start to see some sprouts, and after about 3 days, they're ready to start to use. Don't worry if all the beans don't sprout, that's okay. Some will sprout and some won't. If you're concerned about spoilage, you can try the process with the seeds in the refrigerator, but it will go much slower. Know too that when you start cooking, it will stop the sprouting process. And also, once you have your beans all sprouted, you can hold them in the refrigerator for about 2 to 3 days. Sprouting is recommended for all types of beans, legumes, and seeds, except for soy. For soy, it's recommended that you use a fermentation to reduce the anti-nutrients. Now, you can find the fermentation starters at health food stores, Asian markets, and online. And you get a different type of fungi depending on what type of soy product you want to end up with. Rinse whole soybeans in water. Then put them in water at a ratio of 3 times the water to the amount of beans, and let them soak overnight at an ambient temperature. Once the skin loosens, remove them and drain the soybeans. For most soy products, you're going to grind the beans, but for natto, we're going to leave them whole. And what I've done is I have a saucepan, and I'm going to set this over medium heat. I've got the same amount of water in the pan as I have soybeans, so equal parts water to soybeans, and I'm just going to cook them. At this point, for tempeh, you would add vinegar. Once your soybeans have cooked, you're going to take them off the heat and let them cool. You'll add your strain of starter and let your soybeans incubate for 1 to 2 days, depending on the recipe. If you have access to fermented soy products at the store, it's recommended that you buy them rather than make them. It can get a little complicated, and if you do make them at home, be sure and follow food safety guidelines carefully with soy products. Mushrooms are available in fresh, canned, and dried options. Canned can be the easiest to use, but just like anything else that's canned, you really sacrifice the taste and texture when you use them. Dried mushrooms are a great way to keep the variety around the house without worrying about spoilage. These are very easily reconstituted by placing them in hot water. You can pre-flavor them by adding herbs or bouillon to the water. With fresh mushrooms, you want to use the whole mushroom, the stems as well, because there's plenty of nutritive value and flavor there also. And when using fresh mushrooms, you always want to be sure and wash them. So run them under running water and rub them with your fingers to get them clean. When it comes to grains, they can have similar nutritional issues as legumes. For this reason, sprouted grains are popular as well. Sprouted grains are available in flours and breads, or you can always sprout your own. Measure out quantity of grain equal to about half the amount you ultimately need for your meal. Rinse the grain thoroughly. Be sure to remove any rotten grain, stones, or other debris. Place the rinsed grain in a pot. Add enough water to cover the grain completely, plus another inch or so to account for swelling. Cover the pot with a lid or cloth and set out in a warm location overnight. Place the soaked, drained grains in a clean cheesecloth and close the cloth. Place on a plate in the same warm location all day. Check on the grain about every few hours. If the cloth gets really soaked on top, change it for another. The grains are considered adequately sprouted when the length of the sprouts reach about 2 millimeters. Note that this may produce a slightly tangy taste, somewhat similar to the sourdough principle, though that is made with yeast. This tangy taste is why sprouted grain baked goods are generally made with a mix of sprouted and unsprouted flours. In general, rinsing your grains is recommended. For grains like rice, they can be glutinous, so rinsing them can help the grains separate in the cooking process and just be an overall better product. Quinoa can be really bitter, and if you'll rinse the grain before you cook it, it can alleviate some of that bitterness. If you're still having a problem with bitterness, consider toasting the grain in the oven for just a few minutes before cooking, and that may help as well. Now let's talk about fruits and vegetables. Fruits and vegetables have vitamins, minerals, and nutrients that you really just can't get anywhere else. However, it's important to know that fruits and vegetables can harbor some bacteria, fungi, and even some pesticides. If you buy organic, you can eliminate a lot of this. But always remember, you've got to be very clean. You've got to do your job and wash your fruits and vegetables. Ready-made powders to be mixed with water to wash fruits and vegetables are available, but it's really easy to make your own wash. Let me show you how. I'm going to start with a cup of water. To this, I'm going to add 1/4 cup of vinegar. And then I'm going to add a tablespoon of salt, just regular table salt. and a tablespoon of baking soda. And last, a tablespoon of fresh squeezed lemon juice. And I'm just going to stir this up, and don't let it alarm you, it is going to foam up. And now I have my very own fruit and vegetable wash. Next, rinse with cool water or solution, rubbing the surface with your hands, or soak the produce in the solution for up to half an hour in a clean bowl or bucket and then rinse with water. Or use a brush dedicated to use for produce only and scrub the surface of fruits and vegetables, especially if you want to eat the peel like an apple. Washing fruits and vegetables can speed up spoilage, so be sure and wash just before you're ready to eat. Peeling and cutting fruits and vegetables can result in some nutrition loss, so you always want to buy whole fruits and vegetables and cut them yourself just before you're ready to enjoy them. When cutting fruits and vegetables, be sure your knife or chopper blade is sharp. A dull knife or blade can increase the cutting damage and therefore the nutrient loss. A sharp blade may also decrease the risk of bacterial growth. Just remember safety first. Try to cut larger pieces rather than smaller to minimize cutting. Try to cut the fruit or vegetables in or over a dish which they will be cooked or served to ensure that nutrient-rich juices are retained. If not, then use a plastic or rubber spatula to rescue the liquid from the cutting board. And remember, just like washing, cut your fruits and vegetables right before you're ready to use them. Now that we've selected and prepared our ingredients, it's important to consider the last key component in maximizing the nutritive value in our foods, and that is the equipment that we use to prepare them with. We talked about the importance earlier of having a sharp knife when it's time to cut your fruits and vegetables. The same holds true for blenders and choppers. Be sure the blades are nice and sharp, and if they're not, you need to have them professionally sharpened. If you're interested in sharpening the blades yourself, it's recommended you do this manually, using a sharpening stone or a design file for this purpose. Electric sharpeners and grinders can strip away important metal from the blade of your knife, weakening the blade and making them dangerous to use. Kitchen scissors can be a valuable tool and an alternative to knives for certain purposes, such as chopping herbs and trimming fat. When it comes to cutting boards, you basically have two options: acrylic or plastic, and wooden surfaces. And they both have their advantages. When it comes to acrylic and plastic, it's great because they can be put right into the dishwasher, and their surfaces don't harbor bacteria. That's exactly what can happen with wooden surfaces. When you use your knife to cut, it can create grooves, and in those grooves, bacteria can reside. Now lately it's been said that bacteria doesn't multiply, which is a good thing. But when you wash the wooden surface, sometimes the grooves swell and release the bacteria. It's important to keep the following in mind. Avoid cross-contamination by using different cutting boards for animal foods, produce, and breads. Clean the cutting board immediately after use with hot soapy water, then dry with the towel. For higher risk foods, diluted chlorine bleach is recommended. Flood the surface, allow it to sit for several minutes, and then rinse with clear water and then dry. Replace worn cutting boards. In other words, when they develop excessive or deep, hard to clean grooves, it's time to replace them. Let's talk about pots and pans. Stainless steel, cast iron, and porcelain have long been considered the best choices for cooking, but lately, ceramic-coated aluminum and anodized aluminum have been added in the mix. They have a lot of advantages, one being that they're very lightweight. Also, they're corrosion resistant and easy to clean. All of these surfaces need to be cleaned gently to avoid leaching of the materials into the food. Cast iron has the advantage of adding iron content to acidic foods cooked in it. The disadvantage is that it's heavy and there's such a thing as too much iron, so a good mix of cookware from various materials can be advantageous. The heat that comes from cooking can destroy some of the nutrients in our food. Also, cooking water leaches nutrients from food, so one of the best methods for cooking is steaming. Some people like to use steamer pots, but you can convert any pot by placing a steamer basket. Add fluid up to the holes. This can be plain water or it can be broth or stock to add a little bit of flavor. Cover and heat. Another method to preserve nutrients is to cook the vegetables in the liquid that's going to be served with them, like soups and sauces. Even when cooking with good fats, there are some advantages to reducing the amount of fat that you use in your cooking. This is where non-stick or anodized pans come into play. In the past, there'd been a lot of concern about the surfaces on these pans. Today, there are definitely some safe options on the market. Aluminum is a common material for cookware because it's lightweight. But where regular aluminum cookware has received criticism, newer anodized aluminum has been treated in a way that prevents leaching into foods. Ceramic-coated aluminum boasts similar reductions in risk and is just as stable in conditions of high heat. Coatings can be preserved by using rubber or plastic spatulas only, and when it's time for cleanup, just use hot soapy water or some of the products on the market that are citrus-based and very gentle. Don't use any harsh scrubs or brushes. Other options to decrease the amount of fat in your foods is to use the oil mister or the oil brush. With the oil mister, you're just going to gently spray the oil onto the food before cooking. This is a great option to give you an oven-roasted, crispy dish without the deep fat frying. And the same really works with the oil brush as well. You just gently brush a small amount of oil on, and it helps to reduce the fat in your foods. Thanks for joining us today as we covered proper food preparation for healthy foods and equipment selection. I hope you'll join us back in our next video where we put these techniques into play as we produce some healthy recipes.